school education in the UK was, I went to a boarding school in Scotland, and I was from the south coast of England. And having gone through boarding school, I then went to university in Edinburgh. I did medicine. So in the UK, you go straight into med school out of high school. And it's a 5-year course. So I did medicine in Edinburgh. And it was actually while I was at medical school that I decided I wanted to work with viruses, which has become my life goal, if you like, to use viruses as cancer therapy. And the story behind that was that I was, I think, a third-year medical student, and I just completed my microbiology final exam. And I'd been invited back for a distinction oral. There were 4 people out of the year of 150 got invited back. And I had a phone call before the distinction oral to tell me my sister had died in a house fire. And so I went home to the funeral, and while I was traveling, I was reading the I was reading about viruses, because I needed something to, I mean, it was so awful, just needed something to take my mind off it. And it was then that I decided, this is nature's last untapped bioresource, and we can use these as a cancer therapy. And so basically I kind of just resolved at that time that's what I would do with my career. So my career ever since then has been all about viruses for cancer therapy. So anyway, I got through medical school, and I found it, I had very good grades from medical school, and then I found it hard to get a job. And you know, you have to do similar to internship here. It's called, it's similar to the residency here. You have to do this 1 or 2 years of completing your training actually on the job. And so we call them house jobs. So I applied for house jobs and I didn't get invited. I got invited for interview for all of them, and then I didn't get a job. So after about the 10th interview, I said to my wife, I don't know what's happening. And she said, well, run through for me what goes on at interview. So I said to her, well, you know, I go into the room, it's all very nice and friendly, we smile, we shake hands, I sit down, and then they ask me, what would you like to do with your life? What's your career ambition? I told them I want to cure cancer with viruses. And then I said very quickly, it sort of dries up, and then they send me out the room after 5 or 10 minutes. And everybody else seems to stay in there for half an hour for the interview. So she said to me, okay, lesson number 1 about job interviews is that you have to express some level of interest in the job that you've applied to do. So that was fantastic advice. So next job interview I went to, I said, yeah, I want to be a surgeon, and I got a job. And so anyway, I learned.
For me to see people who are really invested in their work and see how, if they have sort of a line between how they define success and how they define success in their work, because I think it's hard to separate those things sometimes. But
I mean, the time when work-life balance was tough was as a junior doctor in the UK, because there, you know, we had these very long shifts, because the junior doctors, the residents, had to share they'd do a 40-hour week officially, and then the remaining hours of the week they would share between them, either on a 1 in 2, so you'd split them 50-50, or a 1 in 3, depending on how many residents there were on the unit. And a 1 in 2 was very tough, because, you know, you would, for a 1 in 2, you'd come in Friday morning, if it was your weekend on, and you'd go home Monday evening. And for that period of time, you were the resident for, you were the first person to call for patients being admitted to the hospital who needed to be clocked in and, you know, set up with their medications, who needed IVs inserted and so on. You would be the first on call for the ICU to resuscitate patients who had cardiac arrest, etc. And my worst ever weekend, I think I got 2 hours of sleep between Friday morning and Monday evening, And you know, we used to have dinner parties for the residents. You know, we'd all get together and people would be falling asleep at the dinner table.
Oh my.
But that was tough because it was a bit too much. But having said that, you know, it doesn't happen anymore. But having said that, when you look back on it, it was priceless experience. Because when a patient comes into hospital with whatever, I mean, there was sort of standard emergency admissions that would come in of a Friday, Saturday, Sunday evening. You know, they'd be acute worsening of chronic bronchitis. You know, someone with chronic bronchitis would get a chest infection. It would be attempted suicide through overdosing. So, you know, especially on Friday and Saturday nights. It would be the acute asthmatic attack, the heart attack. You know, there were some standard things. There were probably, you know, 12 or so problems that people would come in with and that you'd have to deal with. So you got pretty familiar dealing with it. But each patient who came in, you would then follow through the course of their hospital admission, and you'd be the only person there for them. You'd keep coming back to that same patient, and you would see everything develop, as opposed to coming in, doing 8 hours, and then leaving, and somebody else takes over, and when you come back, you know, that patient's done and has left the hospital. So this way you got the really, you know, start to finish. Okay, you know, I'm caring for you. I see how things develop. I see, you know, all the issues that arise during that time. So it was a phenomenal learning experience, and unmatchable, I think.
Yeah.
And it was at some level a disservice to the patients because they were dealing with very sleepy doctors, and you know, I never did it.
Yeah.
I never did it, but I've had colleagues who just fell asleep at the patient, you know, taking a history and then kind of fell asleep.
God.
And the patient says, "Oh, I didn't like to wake you up. So you look so."
Don't want to disturb you. How do you do your job in that little sleep? That's something I like.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know
hard.
how you function.
It's hard. But you
find a way, I
you
guess.
kind of find a way.
Yeah.
And
Oh my God.
but you do get a bit irritable, you know. If you get to your bed and then 5 minutes later, and you're desperate to sleep, and then 5 minutes later the pager goes off and you have to get up again.
I find that there's like a wrong motivation for entering med school. Do you find students who do it just for the title, or you know, is there things that you'd be wary of? Do you think, or?
Well, I didn't have the right motivation for medical school,
okay.
according to current selection process. I mean, I was at school, I was good at science, and actually I loved learning, and so, you know, my grades were kind of good across the board, but it was science that I enjoyed most. And so looking at what career in science would make most sense, it was medicine. So I wasn't driven by the sort of motivations that people need to declare now in order to get into medical school. And not just need to declare, but need to prove. And I was accepted into medical school based on an application without an interview. And that was actually fairly common at the time. That was,
okay.
It was simply, you know, tough curriculum. We need people with high grades who can actually assimilate knowledge fast and efficient. And so I think the pressure on places has increased. So now you still have to have those high grades, and you have to be capable of doing all the learning, but now you also have to prove, and it's also in the UK, so I don't think this is unique to the US, but you also have to prove that you really want to do it for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
And you know, those right reasons are all to do with the sort of idealistic motivations that I talked about for why I decided I wanted to cure cancer with viruses. And I'm not sure about it. I think, you know, as soon as you set the rules of engagement, then people very rapidly get to understand those rules of engagement,
okay.
and then they play to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure that,
yeah.
I think the people who can sell that message best are put at an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
It's very,
It's a
very
game.
difficult
Yeah.
at an interview to actually know a person's mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible to know their mind also from their you know, their personal
their
statements,
applications.
etc. So, so I don't know that we necessarily choose the right people. I know that there are a lot of applicants relative to the number of places.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just not sure that there's a perfect way ever
to choose.
to do
That's
this
what I was
kind of
thinking.
competitive thing.
Yeah.
I also know that a lot of medical students now entering medical school in the US have taken time out between college and medical school, either because they had to, because their first application was unsuccessful, or because they chose to. And certainly in Mayo Medical School, you know, most of the students now have had between 2 and 8 years doing something else after
Wow.
college
Okay.
before they come into med school.
Yeah.
So it's and I worry about that too, because, you know, as I said to you earlier, you know, I came straight from high school to med school, and so graduated from medical school age 23, and started practicing medicine at that point. And now here in the US, you have to go through your undergrad, so you've got 4 years there, it takes you out to 22. And then if you go straight to medical school, you're out to 26.
Mm-hmm.
If you take those years out, then, you know, people are pushing 30 when they graduate, or beyond 30. And so it shortens that career time when you're actively practicing. It greatly increases the amount of debt you have at the time of entry into the workforce.
Okay.
And I think that's a huge albatross around the neck of so many medical students who go through. I don't know, I just worry about it. I know that it's been a wonderful career for me. You know, it's just a huge privilege to actually be a doctor. And, you know, people come in and they tell you their all their secrets, and they you know, they trust themselves to you, and it is a huge privilege to be in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn a lot from everyone you ever interact with. But also it's like never a dull moment, you know. It's everything's different all the time. Life becomes a great, you know, fun problem solving exercise.
Yeah, crossword puzzle.